The survey stakes made the HOA president panic. I inherited 1,200 acres in Montana, hoping to leave my troubles behind. The lake was quiet. The old dam still stood. Then one morning I found a bright orange notice nailed to my grandfather's gate, demanding overdue HOA rent. A few hours later, the HOA president showed up claiming my ranch belonged under her authority. The next day, the police arrived. What started as a rent notice turned into a fight over land, hidden records, and a secret buried for decades beneath my own floorboards. And when I finally uncovered the truth, an entire neighborhood's future hung in the balance. So before we get into it, take a second to subscribe if you enjoy stories about land, justice, and ordinary folks standing their ground when something just doesn't add up. Now let me tell you what happened. The first thing I noticed about the ranch was the silence. Not the empty kind, the honest kind. The kind you only find when you're miles from a highway, miles from a city, and even farther from the people who think they own your time. I shut off my pickup and sat there for a moment, staring across the water. Mercer Lake stretched across the valley exactly the way I remembered it from childhood. The surface reflected the afternoon sun like polished steel. Beyond it stood the old dam my grandfather built with a crew of ranchers long before I was born. The dam was still there. The lake was still there. And somehow, after everything else in my life had fallen apart, the ranch was still there too. 1,200 acres. My grandfather's land. Now mine. I stepped out of the truck and took a long breath. 3 months earlier, I'd signed divorce papers. 6 weeks earlier, the engineering company I'd worked for nearly 20 years eliminated my position during a restructuring. In less than a year, I'd lost a marriage, a career, and the house I'd spent a decade paying for. Then my uncle passed away. The call from the attorney came 2 days after the funeral. The ranch had been left to me. Every acre. At first I thought it was a burden. Now, standing there beside the lake, it felt like a second chance. The gravel crunched beneath my boots as I walked toward the main gate. The cedar entrance had been built by my grandfather decades ago. The wood was weathered but strong. His initials were still carved into one corner. I reached for the latch. Then I stopped. Something bright orange was attached to the center of the gate. At first I thought it was a hunting permit notice. Then I got closer. My stomach tightened. It wasn't a permit. It was a demand. A large orange paper had been nailed directly into the cedar boards. The words were impossible to miss. Final notice passed due community, rent immediate action required. Stared at it for several seconds. Community rent? I pulled the notice free and unfolded the remaining pages. The document looked official enough. Account number, payment schedule, late fees, legal warnings. There was even a logo printed across the top. Pine Hollow Estates, Homeowners Association. I read the first paragraph twice, then a third time. According to the notice, I owed nearly $8,000 in overdue community rent, maintenance assessments, and infrastructure fees. Failure to pay within 30 days could result in enforcement actions and access restrictions. I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was ridiculous. An HOA charging rent. On my ranch. I looked around. There wasn't a subdivision in sight. No clubhouse, no community pool, no rows of identical houses, just cattle pasture, pine ridges, lake shoreline, and the old dam. The nearest neighborhood was several miles away beyond the eastern ridge. I flipped through the pages again. The numbers were real. The threats were real. The signatures were real. Whoever sent this expected payment. A cold feeling settled into my chest. People don't send notices like this by accident. Somebody believed they had authority here. I folded the papers and slipped them under my arm. Then I unlocked the gate and drove toward the ranch house. The main house sat on a rise overlooking the water. It needed work. Fresh paint. New roofing in places. 100 small repairs. But it was solid. The kind of place built before shortcuts became standard practice. I spent the next few hours carrying boxes inside and opening windows. Every room held memories. Photos, furniture, tools, the smell of old wood and dust. By sunset, I'd almost convinced myself the notice was some bureaucratic mistake. Maybe a wrong address. Maybe somebody entered the wrong parcel number. Maybe some HOA manager saw Mercer Lake Road on a map and made assumptions. But every time I tried to dismiss it, something bothered me. The notice had my name, my correct address, my parcel identification number. Somebody had done their homework. That night I sat at the kitchen table reviewing the paperwork again. One detail kept catching my attention. Under property classification, someone had typed Unit 47. I frowned. I didn't own a unit. I owned a ranch. The distinction mattered. The more I read, the stranger everything became. The HOA claimed responsibility for maintaining access roads. The ranch road had existed before Pine Hollow Estates was ever built. The HOA claimed oversight of shared infrastructure. The dam had been constructed by my grandfather 60 years ago. Nothing lined up. Nothing made sense. Around 9 o'clock, I walked outside. The lake was dark now. Moonlight shimmered across the water. The old dam stood silent against the far shore. I looked toward the eastern ridge where the subdivision supposedly sat. Tiny lights glowed in the distance. Maybe 30 homes, maybe 50, too far away to tell. I folded the notice and shoved it into my jacket pocket. Tomorrow I'd start making phone calls. County records, property offices, maybe a lawyer if necessary. There had to be a simple explanation. There had to be. Then I heard an engine. At first it was distant, then closer. Much closer. Headlights appeared on the ranch road. I frowned. Nobody should have been driving up here. The vehicle rounded a bend and continued toward the house without slowing. Not a pickup, not a ranch vehicle. A white luxury SUV, clean. Expensive, completely out of place on a Montana ranch road. The SUV kept coming, straight toward me. And somehow I knew the driver wasn't lost. The white SUV rolled to a smooth stop 20 feet from the porch. The engine shut off. For a moment, nobody moved. Then the driver's door opened. A woman stepped out wearing a tailored cream-colored jacket that looked completely out of place on a ranch road coated in dust. She glanced at the lake, the house, the gate. Then her eyes settled on me. She walked forward like she already owned the ground beneath her feet. "Caleb Mercer?" she asked. The way she said it wasn't really a question. I nodded once. Depends who's asking. She smiled politely, not warmly. The kind of smile people use when they're delivering bad news. "My name is Patricia Langford." She reached into her purse and handed me a business card. I looked down. Pine Hollow Estates Homeowners Association. President. My eyes lifted back to hers. "So you're the one sending rent notices." Her smile didn't move. I wanted to introduce myself personally before the situation escalates. That caught my attention. Escalates. Your account is significantly overdue. I laughed. Actually laughed. The absurdity of it finally broke through. My account? Yes. She folded her hands together. The Mercer property falls under Pine Hollow Estates jurisdiction. I stared at her, then at the card, then back at her. No. She tilted her head. No? No. I pointed toward the lake. My family owned this land before Pine Hollow existed. The county records disagree. That answer landed harder than I expected. Not because I believed her. Because she said it with absolute confidence. As if she'd repeated it dozens of times. As if nobody had ever challenged her. I crossed my arms. Let's assume for a second you're serious. I am. What exactly are you charging me for? Road maintenance, shared infrastructure, community access improvements, environmental stewardship programs. The list sounded rehearsed, like she'd memorized it. I glanced toward the ranch road. The road was built by my grandfather. The current designation classifies it as a shared-use corridor. The dam was built by my grandfather, too. The county recognizes broader community benefit. Every answer came instantly. No hesitation, no uncertainty, just authority. That bothered me more than the notice itself. Because people bluff. But Patricia didn't sound like she was bluffing. She sounded like someone holding paperwork. Then she delivered the first real punch. Your uncle understood the arrangement. I felt my jaw tighten. What arrangement? The agreement between the Mercer property and Pine Hollow Estates. I took a step closer. There was no agreement. She held my gaze. Your grandfather negotiated access accommodations years ago. The words hit harder than they should have, because my grandfather wasn't here to deny them. Neither was my uncle. Only me. And suddenly I was standing on inherited land, being told that dead men had signed away rights I didn't know existed. What kind of agreement? I asked. Patricia shrugged. Records from before my time. Convenient. Then show them to me. Her expression remained calm. That information will be available through proper channels. Of course it would. I looked at the orange notice still sticking from my jacket pocket. You triple the fees, call them rent, threaten enforcement, and now tell me my grandfather agreed to it. The increase was approved by the board. My family wasn't on your board. No, she said. No, but they were subject to it. That was the first moment genuine anger replaced confusion. I had spent all day assuming there had to be some administrative mistake. Patricia's confidence suggested something else entirely. Someone believed this was real. Someone had spent years acting as if my family's ranch belonged under HOA authority. And maybe nobody had challenged them. Until now. I folded the business card and slipped it into my pocket. Here's what's going to happen. Patricia waited. I'm calling the county tomorrow. You're welcome to. I'm reviewing every property record attached to this ranch. Of course. And I'm not paying $1. For the first time, her smile faded. Not much. Just enough. 30 days, Mr. Mercer. Her voice turned colder. If the balance remains unresolved, enforcement procedures begin. What does that mean? Additional penalties. She paused, then added the part she clearly wanted me to hear. Access restrictions, legal filings, possible law enforcement involvement. There it was. the threat underneath the paperwork. I felt the anger settle deeper, not explosive, focused, calculated. The same feeling I'd learned to trust during 20 years solving engineering problems. When something didn't make sense, you didn't panic. You found the flaw. Patricia looked toward the lake again. Beautiful property. It is. Pine Hollow residents appreciate it. My eyes narrowed. What does that mean? She smiled once more. The colder version. The community has enjoyed access to portions of the area for years. Access. The word stuck in my head. Access to what? The road? The shoreline? The lake? Before I could ask, she stepped back toward her SUV. I'd encourage you to review the county records before making assumptions. Then she opened the door. And Mr. Mercer? I waited. The previous owner never challenged the arrangement. She got inside. The door closed. A moment later, the SUV turned around and headed back down the ranch road. I watched the taillights disappear into the darkness. The previous owner. My uncle. A man stubborn enough to argue with a fence post. A man who spent his life protecting this ranch. The idea that he quietly accepted HOA rent demands didn't sit right. Not even a little. I stood there for several minutes after Patricia left. The lake behind me. The notice in my pocket. The questions multiplying by the second. Then I remembered something. At the bottom of the rent notice was a parcel designation. Unit 47. And Patricia had just referred to my ranch as part of Pine Hollow's jurisdiction. Not neighboring, not adjacent. Part of it. That wasn't arrogance. That was documentation. Somewhere there were records supporting her story. Whether those records were legitimate was another matter. I looked toward the dark silhouette of the ranch house. Tomorrow I would start pulling county files, property records, surveys, anything connected to the Mercer Ranch. Because one thing had become painfully clear. Patricia Langford wasn't collecting money by mistake. She believed she had authority over my land, and if she believed that, somebody had given her a reason. The next morning, I found out just how far she was willing to take it. A siren echoed across the ranch road, and a county sheriff's cruiser appeared at my gate. I set down my coffee and walked onto the porch. The cruiser rolled past the cedar entrance and stopped near the house. The driver's door opened. A tall man stepped out, adjusting his hat as he approached. Sheriff Wade Collins. I recognized him immediately from county meetings years ago. He wasn't the type to waste time, which made his visit concerning. "Morning, Caleb." "Morning, Sheriff." His eyes moved briefly toward the gate, then toward the ranch road, then back to me. "You settle in all right?" "Trying to." A faint smile crossed his face. "Doesn't look like they're giving you much time." There was no need to ask who he meant. "Patricia Langford." He nodded. "Patricia Langford." The sheriff pulled a folder from beneath his arm. "Mind if we talk?" I gestured toward the porch. A few moments later, we were sitting across from each other at the weathered table my grandfather had built decades earlier. Sheriff Collins opened the folder. Inside sat several printed maps. Photographs. Complaint forms. Official county documents. My stomach tightened. "What's this?" "Complaint. Against me? Against your gate. For a second, I thought I'd misheard him. My gate? He slid a document across the table. The complainant section listed Pine Hollow Estates Homeowners Association. Patricia Langford's signature sat at the bottom. The accusation read, "Obstruction of community access route." I stared at it, then looked up. You've got to be kidding. I wish I was. The sheriff pulled out one of the maps. Take a look. I leaned forward. The map showed the ranch, the lake, the dam, the road, leading toward Pine Hollow Estates. Then I saw it. A shaded strip highlighted in yellow. The strip ran directly through my ranch entrance, following the exact route of the Mercer Ranch Road. A label sat beside it. Shared access corridor. He blinked, then looked again. Still there. What is this? County GIS records. No, I pointed at the map. That's my road. According to this filing, it's classified as shared access. It was built by my grandfather. I know. The sheriff's calm answer stopped me. You know, everybody around here knows. His voice remained steady. That's why this is strange. For the first time since arriving at the ranch, somebody else acknowledged the obvious. That mattered. Then why am I looking at a map that says otherwise? Sheriff Collins leaned back. That's the question. The answer surprised me. I expected resistance. Instead, I found skepticism. The sheriff tapped the map. Patricia's been filing complaints for months. Months? He nodded. Before your uncle passed. That got my attention. What kind of complaints? Blocked access, maintenance disputes, shared infrastructure concerns. I felt a knot tighten in my chest. My uncle had never mentioned any of this. Not once. Did he fight it? He pushed back. The sheriff chose his words carefully, but he wasn't exactly eager to spend his final years in court. That sounded more like my uncle. Stubborn, practical, tired. The sheriff slid another document across the table. This one looked older. A county planning record. Several sections had been highlighted. I immediately spotted something disturbing. A notation added nearly 20 years ago. Community Access Easement Review. What's that supposed to mean? That's what I'd like to know. The sheriff rubbed his jaw. The problem is, every current county map references the same corridor. I looked out toward the road, toward the gate, toward land my family had controlled for generations, then back to the documents. Somebody changed something. The words came out before I could stop them. Sheriff Collins didn't answer immediately. That silence told me everything. Because he wasn't disagreeing. He simply couldn't prove it. Finally, he said, "Maybe." I stared at the maps, the complaint, the corridor, the notices. All of it suddenly connected. Patricia hadn't invented this yesterday. She'd been building toward something for years. Years of paperwork, years of filings, years of records slowly becoming accepted truth. The sheriff closed the folder. I'm not here to threaten you, I know, but I need to document the complaint. I nodded. What happens next? If nothing changes, they'll probably file for injunctions. The word landed heavily. Legal action, court orders, restrictions. Exactly what Patricia promised. The sheriff stood. Caleb. I looked up. You got deeds? Some. You better find the rest. That got my attention. The rest? He glanced toward the ranch house. Old ranches always have records people forget about. His eyes settled on the house. Your uncle wasn't the type to throw things away. The comment lingered, because it felt less like advice and more like a warning. The sheriff walked toward his cruiser, then stopped. One hand resting on the door. One more thing. What? Patricia usually gets what she wants. I waited. His expression hardened. But she's pushing harder than normal on this one. The cruiser door opened. Ask yourself why. Then he drove away. I stood there long after the dust settled. The maps remained on the table. The complaint remained in my hand. And one thought kept repeating itself. Patricia wasn't acting like someone trying to collect a fee. She was acting like someone protecting something valuable, something hidden. I spent the rest of the afternoon searching through filing cabinets. Closets, drawers, old boxes, nothing. Just tax receipts, feed invoices, repair records, normal ranch paperwork. By evening, frustration had started replacing curiosity. Maybe the sheriff was wrong. Maybe there weren't any missing records. Maybe my uncle had taken the answers with him. Then, while moving an old dresser in the upstairs bedroom, I heard something. A hollow sound. I froze. Slowly, I moved the dresser aside. One floorboard looked different than the others, slightly raised, recently disturbed. My pulse quickened. I grabbed a screwdriver from my tool belt and pried the board upward. The wood lifted, dust scattered, and beneath it sat a steel lockbox, hidden between the floor joists. Waiting. For a moment, I just stared at it. The steel lockbox was coated in dust, but otherwise untouched. No rust, no visible damage. Somebody had hidden it carefully and expected it to stay hidden. My uncle. There was no doubt in my mind. I reached down and lifted it free. Heavy. Heavier than paperwork alone should have been. The lock sat intact on the front. I carried the box downstairs and set it on the kitchen table. The same table where I'd spent half the night reading HOA notices. The same table where Sheriff Collins had shown me county maps claiming my family's road belonged to somebody else. I looked through the ring of keys I'd inherited. House keys, barn keys, equipment shed keys. Then one small brass key caught my attention. Worn smooth from decades of use. I slid it into the lock. It turned immediately. The click sounded louder than it should have. The lid opened, and everything changed. Inside sat neatly organized folders wrapped in twine. Survey maps, property plats, tax records, correspondence, dozens of documents. The first folder contained deeds dating back more than a century. I unfolded the oldest one carefully. Mercer, Land Holdings. 1891. The original property boundaries stretched across nearly the entire valley. The lake, the dam site, the surrounding ridges. Everything. My pulse quickened. I pulled out another document, then another. Every map told the same story. Every survey confirmed the same boundaries. Nothing about shared corridors, nothing about HOA easements, nothing about Pine Hollow. Then I found something more recent. A yellow legal envelope. My uncle's handwriting covered the front. Important do not discard. He opened it. Inside were copies of letters sent to county offices over nearly 15 years. Boundary disputes. Survey objections. Requests for corrections. Formal complaints. The same issue appeared repeatedly. road designation changes, parcel amendments, access revisions. I sat back slowly. My uncle had known. Not only had he known, he'd been fighting it. Alone. One letter stopped me cold. The county had acknowledged receiving his objection to a map revision affecting the Mercer access road. The revision date was 19 years ago. Attached to the letter sat a handwritten note. 3 words. They're changing maps. The exact phrase Sheriff Collins had unknowingly pointed me toward. I read it twice. Then a third time. My uncle wasn't confused. He wasn't mistaken. He believed someone had intentionally altered records, and he'd documented it. I continued digging. The next folder contained survey overlays. Old boundaries compared against newer county records. The differences were subtle, dangerously subtle. A line shifted here, a road designation altered there. Small enough that most people would never notice, but together they created an entirely different ownership picture. The deeper I looked, the worse it became. Then I found the map, rolled tightly inside a protective tube. Survey certified, stamped, signed, dated decades before Pine Hollow Estates existed. I spread it across the table. The scale was enormous. Every ridge, every creek, every shoreline, every boundary. And there, sitting directly inside Mercer property lines, was the area where Pine Hollow now existed. I froze. My eyes moved across the map again. Then again. The result never changed. The subdivision wasn't next to Mercer land. It wasn't adjacent. It wasn't neighboring. It sat inside the original Mercer boundaries. My heart started pounding. That couldn't be right. Could it? I grabbed newer county maps from the sheriff's folder and laid them beside the survey. The difference was obvious. The newer records showed shifted boundaries, modified access routes, adjusted property lines. The old survey showed none of it. Someone had redrawn the picture. The realization hit me hard. Patricia wasn't collecting HOA fees because she misunderstood the land. She was operating from records that benefited her entire development. If these documents were authentic, the issue wasn't a mistaken rent notice. The issue was a land scandal. One potentially worth millions. A loud knock interrupted my thoughts. I looked toward the front door. Another knock. Harder this time. My stomach tightened. Nobody should have known I was here. I quickly stacked the documents and slid them back into the box. The knock came again. Impatient. Demanding. I crossed the room and opened the door. Nobody stood there. For a moment I thought whoever knocked had left. Then I looked down. An envelope sat on the porch. Bright orange, the same color as the notice on my gate. Pine Hollow Estates. Final warning. I picked it up. Inside was another demand for payment. Higher this time. More penalties. More threats. And one handwritten sentence at the bottom. Failure to cooperate will result in immediate enforcement action. No signature. No explanation. Just the message. I looked toward the eastern ridge where Pine Hollow sat beyond the trees. The timing wasn't a coincidence. Patricia had no idea I'd opened the lockbox, but somehow it felt like she was getting nervous. Because people who feel secure don't send repeated warnings. They don't escalate. They don't pressure. They don't threaten. People only do that when they're afraid. Something is about to surface. I returned to the kitchen table and looked at the century-old survey spread before me. The lines were clear. The dates were clear. The ownership was clear. If these documents held up under scrutiny, Pine Hollow Estates wasn't simply overstepping its authority. It had been built on land my family never legally surrendered. And if that was true, Patricia Langford wasn't hiding a rent dispute. She was hiding a scandal large enough to destroy her entire HOA. The next step was obvious. I needed a lawyer. And I needed one before Patricia made her next move. The next morning, I loaded the steel lockbox into my truck and drove into town. I spent the entire drive thinking about the survey maps, the deeds, the handwritten note. They're changing the maps. My uncle hadn't hidden those records because they were old. He hid them because they were dangerous. The first stop was a small office overlooking the courthouse square. Rachel Boone's name was painted on the glass door. Land rights, property disputes, water access. Exactly what I needed. Rachel greeted me with the expression of someone who had already spent years dealing with bad neighbors and worse paperwork. What brings you in? I set the lockbox on her conference table. An HOA is trying to charge me rent on 1,200 acres. She raised an eyebrow. That's usually not how property law works. That's what I thought. 2 hours later, she wasn't smiling anymore. The documents spread across her table like pieces of a puzzle. She moved from one survey to another, then to the deeds, then back again. Finally, she leaned back in her chair. Where did you get these? My uncle hid them. She tapped one of the original plats. Good thing he did. The seriousness in her voice immediately got my attention. You see something? I see a problem. What kind of problem? The expensive kind. Rachel pulled one survey closer. This boundary predates Pine Hollow by decades. I know. And this one, she pointed to another, matches the railroad survey. Then another. And this tax map. My pulse quickened. What does that mean? She folded her hands. It means your documents agree with each other. That's good. It's very good. Then she pointed at a modern county parcel map I'd printed the night before. This doesn't. I stared at it. Rachel continued. One set of records says your family owns the entire corridor leading to the lake. She tapped the county map. The newer version doesn't. Can they legally change property boundaries like that? Not without proper authority. The room went quiet. Because we were both thinking the same thing. If somebody had changed those records improperly, the consequences could be enormous. Rachel gathered several documents into a separate stack. I'm going to request archived county filings. How long? A few days if we're lucky. I nodded. What should I do? Find witnesses. Witnesses? People who remember the land before Pine Hollow existed. That part was easy. There was exactly one person who came to mind. Earl Whitaker. If anyone knew the history of the valley, it was Earl. His ranch bordered Mercer Land to the north, and he'd lived there since before I was born. I found him repairing fence wire that afternoon. Earl looked exactly the way I remembered. Sun-weathered face, denim jacket, permanent look of skepticism. He listened without interrupting while I explained everything. The notices, the sheriff, the maps, the hidden records. When I finished, he spit into the dirt, then laughed. Not because it was funny, because he couldn't believe it. Patricia finally went after the Mercers. The statement surprised me. Finally? Earl nodded. Developers have been eyeing that lake since the 90s. That got my attention immediately. What developers? The people who built Pine Hollow. He leaned against the fence. They wanted lake access. I remembered Patricia's comment. The community has enjoyed access for years. Suddenly, those words sounded different, more deliberate. Earl continued. Your uncle fought them every time. What kind of fights? Meetings, surveys, lawyers. I frowned. He never told me. Didn't want to drag family into it. That sounded exactly like my uncle. Earl pointed toward the eastern ridge. First thing those developers wanted was control of the road. The road. Always the road. Everything kept leading back to the same piece of land. Did they ever get it? No. His answer came instantly. Then he paused. At least not legally. The words hung between us. Not legally. I told him about the hidden surveys, the altered maps, the HOA corridor designation. His expression darkened. I knew something wasn't right. You did? Earl nodded. Boundary markers started disappearing years ago. That wasn't something I'd expected. Disappearing. Survey stakes, property markers. He looked toward the valley. Small things most people ignore. Suddenly, I wasn't looking at a simple HOA dispute anymore. I was looking at decades of pressure, decades of small changes. Tiny adjustments, tiny revisions. Until eventually, a subdivision believed it owned access through Mercer land. When I returned to the ranch that evening, another orange notice was waiting on my gate. Then I saw a second one, and a third. 3 notices, 3 separate envelopes, all from Pine Hollow Estates, all demanding payment. The fees had increased again. New penalties, new deadlines, new threats. I didn't open half of them. I didn't need to. The timing told me everything. Patricia was accelerating. Rachel had predicted that. People get aggressive when they're afraid of losing control. I drove through the gate and looked toward the lake. For the first time since inheriting the ranch, I felt something changing. Not victory, not yet, but direction. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was building a case. Rachel was digging through county archives. Earl was willing to testify. The hidden surveys supported my family's ownership, and somewhere beneath all of it sat the question Patricia didn't want anyone asking. Who changed the maps? The answer might be sitting in county records, or it might be buried somewhere else entirely. Either way, we were getting closer. And in 3 days, a survey crew would arrive to test every boundary line on Mercer land. If those measurements matched the original plats, everything was about to change. The survey truck rolled onto the ranch just after sunrise. A man climbed out carrying GPS equipment and a stack of field maps. His name was Tyler Grant. Rachel had recommended him personally. According to her, judges trusted his work because he never picked sides. He followed evidence. Nothing else. That was exactly what I needed. For the next several hours, Tyler moved across the property with methodical precision. The ranch road, the lake shoreline, the old dam, the fence lines. Every coordinate was compared against the original surveys from the lockbox. I stayed mostly quiet and let him work. By noon, orange survey stakes had begun appearing across the property, one after another, like markers leading toward a truth someone had spent years trying to bury. Tyler stood beside the old ranch road studying his equipment. Then he looked at me. "You said the county map shows shared access here?" That's what Patricia claims. He checked his screen again, then frowned. "Interesting." "What?" "This road falls exactly where your original survey says it should." My pulse quickened. No overlap, none. He pointed toward the ridge. "The county designation doesn't match these coordinates." For the first time, someone other than me had said it. Out loud. A professional surveyor. The records didn't agree. We continued toward the lake. The same pattern repeated. Then the dam. Again. The original Mercer documents matched every measurement. The newer county records didn't. Around 2 o'clock, I heard an engine approaching. I already knew who. It was before the vehicle came into view. White SUV, perfect paint, Patricia Langford. She stopped near the survey crew and stepped out immediately. No greeting, no courtesy, just irritation. "What exactly is happening here?" Tyler glanced up from his equipment. "Boundary verification." Patricia looked at me. "You authorized this?" "It's my property." Her jaw tightened. The HOA was not notified. Tyler actually laughed. The HOA doesn't approve private surveys. Patricia ignored him. "This land is under active jurisdiction review." That was news to me. "According to who?" "The community board." I crossed my arms. "The community board doesn't own this ranch." She opened her mouth, then stopped. Because Tyler had just driven another orange stake into the ground, directly beside the ranch road. The sound echoed sharply. Patricia looked at the marker, then at the GPS unit, then back at me. For the first time since I'd met her, uncertainty appeared in her expression. Just for a second. But I saw it. She saw the same thing I did. The measurements weren't helping her. Tyler checked another coordinate, then wrote something down. Patricia's voice sharpened. "Those markers aren't legally recognized. They will be once I finish my report." The answer came without emotion, without hesitation. Pure professional confidence. Patricia looked genuinely uncomfortable. That was new. Until now, she'd acted like somebody holding all the cards. Now someone was checking the deck, and she didn't like what they were finding. "You should be careful," she said to me. The warning wasn't subtle. What does that mean? It means challenging established boundaries can create serious consequences. I stared at her. Funny, that's exactly what I was thinking. Her eyes narrowed. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she turned and headed back toward her SUV. Before getting inside, she stopped. One hand resting on the door. "You still haven't paid the outstanding balance." I almost laughed. After everything we'd uncovered, she was still talking about rent. "No." Her expression hardened. Then, "Don't say you weren't warned." A second later, she drove away. Dust trailing behind her vehicle. Tyler watched her disappear down the road. She's nervous. The statement caught me off guard. "You think so?" "I know so." He pointed toward the survey markers. "People don't show up personally when they're confident." That observation stayed with me. Because it felt true. Patricia wasn't trying to collect money anymore. She was trying to stop something. The question was what? By late afternoon, the survey was nearly complete. Tyler gathered the final measurements and compared them against the original Mercer plats. The silence lasted almost a full minute. Then he lowered the papers. Well, my stomach tightened. Well, what? He looked directly at me. The original surveys are remarkably accurate. I waited. The boundaries match. Relief hit me first, then anticipation. How closely? Within a margin most modern surveys would envy. I stared at the orange stakes stretching across the property, across the road, along the lake, toward the dam. Every one of them supported the Mercer records. Every one of them challenged the county revisions. Tyler handed me a preliminary map. The lines were unmistakable. Mercer Land, Mercer Road, Mercer Shoreline, Mercer Dam access. The evidence was finally catching up to the truth. But as we walked back toward the house, my phone rang. Rachel Boone. I answered immediately. Tell me you've got good news. I do. Her voice sounded serious. But I've also got bad news. The good feeling vanished instantly. What happened? Patricia filed additional complaints this afternoon. Of course she had. What kind of complaints? Rachel paused, then delivered the answer. The HOA is requesting emergency authority to remove what they're calling unauthorized obstructions on a shared access route. I looked toward my gate, toward the road, toward the ranch entrance. A cold feeling settled into my chest. Patricia had just watched the survey support my claim, and now she was escalating. Fast. Rachel's voice remained calm. Caleb, I think she's about to make a mistake. I looked again at the ranch entrance. Something told me she was right. The only question was how big that mistake was going to be. I got my answer the following morning, when I stepped outside and found my own property blocked. For a second, I honestly thought I was looking at construction equipment. Then I got closer. Two massive concrete barriers sat directly across the ranch entrance. Each one weighed several thousand pounds. Together, they completely sealed off the road. My road, the only vehicle access to the ranch house, the only route to the lake, the only route to the dam. A bright notice had been taped to one of the barriers. Pine Hollow Estates. Access correction, order authorized community action. I stared at it in disbelief, then anger, then something colder. Because this wasn't a misunderstanding. This was deliberate. Somebody had physically blocked a landowner from entering and leaving his own property. I pulled out my phone and started taking photographs. Every angle, every notice, every barrier, every tire track. Rachel had been very clear. Document everything. I called her immediately. She answered on the first ring. Tell me you found something useful. I found 2 concrete barriers blocking my ranch. Silence. Then, they actually did it. You sound surprised. I'm surprised they were foolish enough to leave evidence. That wasn't the reaction I expected. What do? We use it. Her voice sharpened. Take more photos. Close-ups. Wide shots. Everything. I walked the scene while she spoke. The barriers hadn't appeared by accident. Heavy equipment had delivered them. Fresh track marks cut across the gravel. Rachel continued. Do not move anything. I wasn't planning to. Good. I'm filing an emergency petition today. The words immediately got my attention. For what? Interference with property access. Finally, something concrete. Something a judge could actually see. Rachel paused. Call Sheriff Collins. I already intended to. The sheriff arrived 40 minutes later. His cruiser stopped beside the barriers. For several seconds, he simply stared at them. Then he got out. Well, that single word carried a lot. I pointed at the road. Pretty impressive, isn't it? His expression didn't change. No. He walked forward slowly. It's stupid. That answer surprised me. Sheriff Collins examined the barriers, the notices, the track marks. Then he began taking photographs of his own. Official documentation. Exactly what Rachel wanted. You know who did this? I handed him one of the notices. He read it, then sighed. I can make an educated guess. The sheriff looked genuinely irritated. That was new. Up until now, he'd been neutral, professional, careful. These barriers had crossed a line. They claim it's a shared corridor, I said. They claim a lot of things. He photographed the HOA notice, then another, then another. This creates problems for them. I looked at him. What kind of problems? The legal kind. Good. Because legal problems were exactly what Patricia deserved. The sheriff stepped back and looked down the blocked road. Rachel called me before I arrived. That caught me off guard. She did? He nodded. She thinks this may become the strongest evidence in your case. The realization settled slowly. The survey had helped. The maps had helped. The deeds had helped. But those things required interpretation. Arguments. Expert testimony. The barriers were different. Anyone could understand them. A jury, a judge, a reporter, even a child. Someone had blocked a ranch owner from using his own road. Simple. Visible. Powerful. The sheriff finished documenting the scene, then turned toward me. Once I complete my report, you're legally entitled to remove obstructions from your property. I looked at the barriers. Today? Not yet. He closed his notebook. Give me a few hours. Fair enough. As he walked back toward his cruiser, another vehicle appeared on the road beyond the barriers. White SUV Patricia. Of course. She stopped on the opposite side and stepped out. For a moment, we simply stared at each other across the concrete blocks, like two people standing on opposite sides of a battlefield. She crossed her arms. The access issue has been corrected. The sheriff looked at her, then at the barriers, then back at her. I could practically hear his patience evaporating. You authorized this? Patricia didn't hesitate. The board did. Based on what authority? The community access designation. Sheriff Collins stared at her. The silence lasted several seconds, long enough to become uncomfortable. Patricia finally shifted her weight. The sheriff spoke carefully. You're aware ownership of that designation is currently disputed? The HOA position remains unchanged. There it was again. That confidence. Except this time it sounded forced, artificial, like someone trying to convince themselves. Rachel had been right. Patricia was making mistakes. Big ones. The sheriff returned to his cruiser without another word. Patricia stayed where she was, watching me. Then she smiled. Not because she was winning, because she thought she was. You could still resolve this peacefully. I almost laughed. She had physically blocked my property, then offered peace. The irony was incredible. No. Her smile faded. You really want this fight? I looked at the barriers, then the notices, then the road. No. I met her eyes. But I'm going to finish it. For the first time, something flickered across her face. Concern. Real concern. Then she got back into her SUV and drove away. An hour later, my phone rang. Rachel. We got it. My pulse jumped. Got what? The hearing. I stood perfectly still. What hearing? The judge approved emergency review. Everything suddenly accelerated. The barriers, the survey, the complaints, the evidence. All of it was moving toward a courtroom. Rachel sounded more energized than I'd heard her all week. Judge Miriam Keller wants to see everything. I looked at the blocked road one last time. Those barriers had been intended as a show of power. Instead, they had become evidence. Evidence strong enough to get a judge's attention. Rachel's final words stayed with me long after the call ended. Patricia just handed us the best exhibit in the case. And for the first time since this entire fight began, I believed we might actually win. The hearing was scheduled 3 days later. By then, word had spread far beyond Pine Hollow Estates. When I arrived at the county courthouse with Rachel Boone, the parking lot was nearly full. Residents from the subdivision stood in small groups near the entrance. Some looked curious, some looked worried. A few looked openly hostile. Most of them had probably spent years hearing one version of the story, Patricia's version. Today, they were about to hear another. Rachel carried 3 thick binders. Evidence, survey reports, property records, tax filings, every step we took toward. The courtroom felt heavier than the last. Not because I doubted the truth, because I knew how much depended on proving it. Inside, Judge Miriam Keller was already reviewing documents when the hearing began. She had a reputation for patience. She also had a reputation for spotting nonsense quickly. I hoped the second reputation was true. Patricia sat across the room beside the HOA's attorney. A polished man named Gerald Voss. Expensive suit, expensive watch. The kind of lawyer hired when people expected to win. Patricia looked confident, at least on the surface. But every few minutes, she glanced toward Rachel's evidence binders. That confidence wasn't as strong as it had been a week ago. The hearing began. Voss stood first. Your Honor, this matter concerns a long-established community access corridor utilized by Pine Hollow Estates residents for nearly 2 decades. He spoke smoothly, confidently. The HOA has maintained roads, infrastructure, and access routes relied upon by hundreds of residents. Judge Keller listened without interruption. Then Voss made the argument I expected. Regardless of historical disputes, the reality is that these routes have functioned as community assets for years. Rachel made a note. I could tell she was waiting. Then Voss introduced photographs, maintenance invoices, HOA records, meeting minutes. Everything designed to create one impression, that Pine Hollow had always controlled the area. When he finished, Patricia looked pleased. Until Judge Keller asked a single question. Do you possess a deed? The courtroom went quiet. Voss blinked. A deed, Your Honor? A deed granting ownership or easement rights. The pause lasted slightly too long. We rely upon county designations and long-standing community use. Judge Keller wrote something down. Nothing else. But Rachel smiled. Barely. Then she stood. Your Honor, we'd like to discuss how those county designations appeared in the first place. The first exhibit went onto the screen. An original Mercer survey. Then another. Then another. Different decades. Different surveyors. Same boundaries. Rachel walked the court through each one, patiently, methodically. No drama, just facts. Then came the tax records. Year after year, decade after decade, the Mercer family paying taxes on the exact land now claimed by Pine Hollow. Judge Keller examined every page. The atmosphere in the room began to change. Residents noticed it too. Whispers spread across the gallery. Patricia stopped looking confident. Then Rachel called Earl Whitaker. Earl walked to the witness stand, wearing the same denim jacket he'd worn when I visited his ranch. No theatrics, no speeches, just honesty. How long have you known the Mercer property boundaries? Rachel asked. About 50 years. Did those boundaries include the ranch road? Always. The lake access? Always. The dam corridor? Always. Voss tried to challenge him. Mr. Whitaker, are you a surveyor? No. So you're not qualified to determine legal boundaries? Earl shrugged. I know where fences were. A few people laughed. Even Judge Keller smiled. The point landed. Earl wasn't testifying about legal theories. He was testifying about reality. Then Rachel introduced Tyler Grant's survey report. The room grew quiet again. Because unlike Earl, Tyler was a licensed professional. Every measurement, every coordinate, every marker. The report confirmed the Mercer plats. Line for line. Judge Keller spent nearly 20 minutes reviewing it. Patricia looked increasingly uncomfortable. Gerald Voss no longer appeared relaxed. And then Rachel unveiled the photographs. The barriers, the notices, the blocked entrance, the sheriff's report. Every image appeared on the courtroom screen. Large, impossible to ignore. Judge Keller studied them carefully, then looked directly at Patricia. Did the HOA authorize these obstructions? Patricia hesitated. A terrible mistake, because hesitation sounds a lot like uncertainty. Finally, she answered. Temporary corrective measures. Judge Keller's expression didn't change. On disputed property? Patricia swallowed. The silence that followed was brutal. Rachel didn't need to say anything. The photographs spoke for themselves. The HOA hadn't protected access. They had blocked a landowner from using his own road. For the first time all morning, momentum shifted completely. I could feel it. Patricia could feel it. Even the residents could feel it. Then Judge Keller leaned back in her chair. Before I make any determination, I want to review one additional document. Rachel nodded. We anticipated that, Your Honor. The judge looked toward both legal teams. I'll reconvene once I've examined the historical ownership records referenced in these surveys. The hearing paused. People immediately began whispering. Questions spread through the room. Concern, confusion, doubt. For the first time, Pine Hollow residents were hearing that the land beneath parts of their community might not belong to the HOA at all. Patricia sat frozen. Gerald Voss spoke quietly beside her. She didn't appear reassured. Rachel closed one of her binders, then looked at me. We're close. I nodded. But there was one more piece left. One document hidden in the county archives. One map nobody in that courtroom had seen yet. A map that could end every argument in a single moment. And Judge Keller had just asked for it. The courtroom reconvened less than an hour later. By then, every seat was filled. Residents lined the back wall. Reporters had appeared. Even people with no connection to Pine Hollow seemed to understand that something unusual was happening. Rachel sat beside me with a new folder resting on top of the evidence binders. She tapped it once. County Archives. My pulse quickened. You found it? We did. Across the room, Patricia looked exhausted. Not angry, not confident. Exhausted. The difference mattered. Because anger fights. Exhaustion usually means someone is running out of places to hide. Judge Keller entered and immediately called the hearing back to order. Rachel stood first. Your Honor, pursuant to the court's request, we obtained certified archival records from the county planning office. She handed documents to the clerk. Then she unfolded a large map. The room went silent. Even from where I sat, I could see the age of the paper. This wasn't a modern survey. It wasn't a recent GIS printout. It was old. Very old. Rachel positioned it on the display board. Railroad Corridor Verification Survey. She looked toward the judge. Dated 1911. A murmur spread through the courtroom. Judge Keller leaned forward. Certified? Yes, Your Honor. The judge nodded. Proceed. Rachel pointed to the map. The original Mercer boundaries appeared exactly where every document from the lockbox said they should. The lake. The ranch road. The dam corridor. Every feature aligned. Then she traced a line farther east, toward Pine Hollow Estates. The line continued. And continued. And continued. Straight through portions of the subdivision. The room became completely still. Because everyone could see it. There was no legal interpretation required. No complicated explanation. No technical language. The map spoke for itself. Several sections of Pine Hollow sat inside Mercer property lines. Rachel let the silence work. Then she introduced the second document. A forgotten county planning overlay discovered in the archives. Prepared decades before Pine Hollow was approved. Again, the boundaries matched. Perfectly. Judge Keller examined both records for nearly 10 minutes. Nobody interrupted. Nobody moved. Finally, she looked toward Gerald Voss. Do you dispute the authenticity of these documents? The attorney stood slowly. And for the first time since the hearing began, he didn't sound confident. We have not had sufficient opportunity to review them. Not a denial. Not even close. Judge Keller noticed. So you do not currently dispute authenticity? Voss hesitated. Not at this time. The answer hit the courtroom like a hammer. Several Pine Hollow residents exchanged worried thoughts and looks. Patricia stared at the table. Rachel continued. Your Honor, these records establish 3 important facts. She held up one finger. The Mercer family maintained continuous ownership of the ranch road. A second finger. The Mercer family maintained continuous ownership of the lake access corridor. A third finger. And the HOA never possessed documented ownership of the areas used to justify rent notices, enforcement actions, or access restrictions. Judge Keller nodded slowly. Then she turned toward Patricia. Miss Langford. Patricia looked up. The confidence she carried to the ranch weeks earlier was completely gone. Did your HOA collect fees based upon authority over these areas? Patricia swallowed. Our understanding was, the judge interrupted. That wasn't my question. Silence. The courtroom waited. Finally, Patricia answered. Yes. A collective reaction swept through the room. Some residents looked stunned. Others looked furious. The implications were becoming impossible to ignore. The HOA had demanded money, issued notices, threatened enforcement, blocked roads. And now the legal foundation beneath those actions appeared non-existent. Rachel wasn't finished. She introduced copies of the rent notices, the enforcement threats, the barrier photographs, the sheriff's report. Every piece fit together. Every piece pointed in the same direction. Not confusion, not misunderstanding. Authority exercised without ownership. Judge Keller reviewed the final exhibit, then closed the file. The sound echoed through the courtroom. Everyone knew what came next. Patricia knew it too. Her attorney whispered something to her. She didn't respond. The judge looked across the room. At Rachel. At Gerald Voss. At the residents. Then finally, at me. The record is clear. Nobody breathed. The historical deeds are clear. The room remained silent. The surveys are clear. Patricia lowered her eyes. The tax records are clear. A resident near the back shook his head in disbelief. Then Judge Keller delivered the sentence that changed everything. The HOA has presented no ownership documents establishing authority over the disputed road, lake access corridor, or associated property. The words landed heavily, because everyone understood them. The HOA's position had collapsed. Completely. Judge Keller organized her notes, then looked toward the clerk. I am prepared to issue a ruling. The tension inside the courtroom became almost unbearable. Residents leaned forward. Reporters raised pens. Patricia sat frozen. Rachel simply folded her hands and waited. And I realized something. The fight that began with an orange notice nailed to my gate was about to end. All because of a map somebody hoped would never be found. Judge Miriam Keller adjusted the documents in front of her and looked across the courtroom. When she spoke, every whisper stopped. The court finds that the Mercer family has established a continuous chain of ownership supported by historical deeds, tax records, certified surveys, and archival county documents. Nobody moved. Nobody interrupted. The only sound was the scratch of a reporter's pen. Judge Keller continued. The Pine Hollow Estates Homeowners Association has failed to establish ownership rights, easement rights, or lawful authority over the disputed road, lake access corridor, or associated Mercer property. Patricia Langford closed her eyes. Just for a second. But I saw it. The realization. The understanding that the foundation beneath everything she'd built was gone. Judge Keller wasn't finished. Accordingly, all rent notices, assessments, penalties, enforcement actions, and access restrictions issued against Caleb Mercer are hereby declared null and void. A ripple spread through the courtroom. Residents exchanged stunned looks. Some looked relieved. Others looked furious. Several turned toward Patricia. Not with support. With questions. Questions she clearly didn't want to answer. Judge Keller looked toward the clerk. The court further orders immediate removal of all barriers and obstructions placed upon Mercer property. I thought about the concrete blocks sitting across my road, the ones Patricia called corrective action. Now they were evidence, and they had helped destroy her case. The judge turned another page, then delivered the ruling that truly changed everything. Based upon the evidence presented, this court finds sufficient cause to refer Pine Hollow Estates' land claims and financial practices for formal review. The room exploded into whispers. Financial practices. Everyone understood what that meant. The HOA had collected fees for years, possibly on property it never legally controlled. Patricia's attorney lowered his head. The fight was over. The consequences were just beginning. When the hearing ended, people didn't rush toward the exits. They rushed toward Patricia. Residents surrounded her almost immediately. Questions came from every direction. Did you know about the maps? How long were we paying those fees? What else weren't we told? Patricia tried to answer, then stopped trying. There were too many voices, too many angry homeowners, too many people realizing they had trusted the wrong person. Rachel gathered her binders. You won. The words felt strange, because the victory wasn't what I'd imagined. I wasn't happy. I wasn't celebrating. Mostly, I felt relieved. Relieved that the truth finally mattered more than the paperwork hiding it. Outside the courthouse, Sheriff Wade Collins stood near the steps. He tipped his hat when he saw me. Told you to find those records? I smiled. You did. He glanced toward the crowd still gathered around. Patricia. Looks like your uncle left you more than land. That hit harder than I expected. Because he was right. My uncle hadn't lost. He'd simply run out of time. The evidence had been waiting. Waiting for somebody to finish the fight. Over the next several weeks, everything changed. The barriers disappeared from my road. The HOA suspended operations. Investigators began reviewing records, finances, and land claims. Board members resigned. Residents demanded answers. And for the first time in years, Pine Hollow Estates had to confront reality instead of assumptions. The most surprising part came afterward. Not from the courts, not from the county, from the residents themselves. A group of homeowners asked to meet. Rachel attended with me. So did Earl Whitaker. The meeting took place beside the lake, the same lake everyone had spent months fighting over. A man stepped forward first. We didn't know. I believed him. Most of them hadn't known. They weren't the people who changed maps. They weren't the people who issued threats. They were simply homeowners who trusted the HOA. A woman spoke next. What happens now? That was the question everyone wanted answered. I looked across the crowd. Families, retirees, people raising kids, people trying to protect the homes they'd invested in. The same people Patricia had claimed to represent. I'm not interested in punishing anyone, I said. The tension eased immediately. I continued. The land belongs to the Mercer family. That hasn't changed. Several heads nodded. But people shouldn't lose their homes because someone else misrepresented the facts. Rachel handed out documents. Fair access agreements, road maintenance arrangements, lake use terms, transparent costs, no hidden fees, no surprise assessments, no threats, just honest agreements. Exactly what should have existed from the beginning. The mood shifted, slowly at first, then noticeably. People stopped looking scared. They started looking hopeful. An older woman approached before the meeting ended. Thank you. For what? For choosing fairness. I thought about that for a moment, then shook my head. This wasn't about winning. She smiled. Maybe, but you still could have chosen revenge. That stayed with me long after she walked away. A month later, I stood beside the old dam at sunrise, the same dam my grandfather built. The same dam at the center of countless arguments, surveys, and legal filings. The water moved steadily through the spillway, unbothered by paperwork, unbothered by politics, unbothered by people trying to rewrite history. Rachel joined me near the railing. It's quiet again. I nodded. It is. Below us, residents from Pine Hollow walked the shoreline. Kids fished near the water. Neighbors talked. No HOA patrols, no warning notices, no orange envelopes, just people enjoying the land honestly, the way it should have been all along. Rachel looked toward the lake. Your grandfather would have liked this. Maybe. I hoped so. I thought about the steel lockbox, the hidden surveys, the note my uncle left behind. They're changing the maps. For years, that warning sat hidden beneath a floorboard, ignored, forgotten, until the right person opened the box. Truth had been there the entire time. Waiting. Just like the land itself. I looked across Mercer Lake one final time. I came here thinking I'd inherited 1,200 acres. What I actually inherited was a responsibility to protect the truth, to protect the land, and to finish a fight my family never truly lost. The water flowed through the dam in a steady current. Quiet, certain, unstoppable, just like the truth.
One thing the experience taught me is that important things don't disappear just because they're ignored. The deed was still there, the survey was still there, the history of the land was still there. For years, those records sat hidden in the box beneath a floorboard, waiting for someone willing to look. And that the lesson I take away from all of this, when something major, whether it's your land, your family history, or simply what's right, don't assume the truth will speak for itself. Sometimes it needs someone patient enough to fight it and steady enough to stand behind it. What stayed with me most wasn't the courtroom ruling or the paperwork. It was seeing a community move forward once the facts were finally clear. Real justice isn't about getting even, it's about restoring trust, protecting what's worth protecting, and making sure the next chapter is built on something solid. I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever had to stand your ground when you know something wasn't right, even when it felt easier to walk away? If so, type yes in the comments. As if this story reminds you that persistence still matters, drop a justice was a well. I read far more comments than you might think, and I always enjoy hearing your experience. And if you enjoy stories about rights, life, property rights, HOA conflicts, and ordinary people facing tough situations with patience and determination, consider subscribing. There are plenty more stories ahead, and I'd be glad to have you along for the ride.